really pleased here to introduce AJ Yan. I've really just gotten to start to get to know AJ this year. And the more I interact with AJ and see the stuff that he's doing, the more and more I'm impressed every single time. AJ is the co-founder and CEO of a company called BiteCheck, where he's on a mission to make compliance suck less. And AJ has already accomplished so much in his career. He's was voted a LinkedIn top voice last year, and he's got a lot of great, insightful posts, not only on security, but on kind of career and life as well. And AJ is going to be talking a little bit about implementing an effective multi-account strategy on AWS. And as he gets his slides and everything set up, I also just want to mention here that, hey, AJ, I don't know how you find the time for all of this, but you've got what, 6 AWS certifications, an AWS solution architect professional, security specialty, and so on. But AJ is also in the process of teaching, right, one of our SANS classes, Sec 557, on continuous audit and automation. So AJ, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thanks a lot, Frank. I appreciate the warm intro, and I do it by not sleeping is the trick, Hopefully I'll start to sleep a little bit more over the next few months here. But thanks everyone for joining. I'm really excited about today's talk. I always appreciate the opportunity to speak at a SANS summit, especially these free ones, because I think it's great to see. Looks like no one can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear.
Oh, okay. I just saw a Q&A pop up that said no audio, but maybe that's not me. But all right, let's get into it, because I want to make sure we maximize our time here. So today I'll be discussing how to implement an effective multi-account strategy on AWS. I think a little bit about me. I'm the co-founder and CEO at BiteCheck, which is a cybersecurity SaaS company focused on automating cybersecurity compliance assessments. I've been in the cybersecurity industry for a little over a decade, with about half of that time in the US Army. Like Frank said, I have a few AWS certs. I sit on a few professional association boards. Really excited about potentially becoming a SANS instructor and helping teach Sec 557. And I'm a proud graduate of Florida State University and Georgetown University. But that's enough about me. Let's go ahead and get started with the conversation. So oftentimes when I'm talking with clients or an individual that's thinking about learning more about the cloud, or even in my role now as a founder, and even before as a consultant, I would run into organizations that are managing and hosting robust SaaS applications that are all located in one account. They're hosting everything in one AWS account. And I'm asking them, why are you doing that? Or as I'm explaining it to someone new in the cloud or talking to clients, I'm like talking about a multi-account strategy. A lot of times I'm asked, why would I do that? Why would I create more than one account if AWS has created these accounts for me to run my resources? Why would I do that? And today we're going to answer that question. And unfortunately, the setup of one account is common, but it is wrong for many reasons. So we're going to talk through the benefits of how to set up multiple accounts. We're also going to talk about some of the tactical ways these multiple accounts should be set up. And then we'll finish up with a brief demo of how this works in a test AWS environment. So why multiple accounts? What's the real reason that we're doing this here? There's a few reasons why AWS recommends implementing a multi-account strategy to help meet your business, governance, security, or operational requirements. And we'll talk about a few of these here on the screen. The first being able to group your workloads based on business purpose and ownership. And as organizations grow, as many of you may understand, there's different business units or different product teams that all have different processes and different ways that they're doing things. And when you try to force everyone into a one-size-fits-all infrastructure, you end up stifling innovation and agility. You end up making things very difficult for people to move fast, for people to operate in the manner that they need, because different business units or different product lines have different needs. So by segmenting these business units and products out, it allows them to operate, but you still have that control. It's decentralized, but you have control because you can provide some overarching guardrails, which we'll talk about on a later slide in this talk. And this is a really great way if you're at a larger organization, you just acquire a company and you're trying to integrate this company into your services. You're trying to make sure that they're not adding any new security weaknesses to your environment. This is a great way to do it because you can just take their account and apply it to your organization structure, which we'll talk about here shortly. Secondly, multiple accounts allow you to apply distinct security controls by environment or business unit. Something that I've said often, maybe on a SANS talk in the past or elsewhere on some of those posts that Frank talked about, is that security, good security requires context. You can't just throw a bunch of security controls at the wall and say, everybody follow those. You have to truly understand what the business is doing. One of my good friends, Jarek Beeson, who does some work with SANS, and I spoke at a SANS conference with him. He's the Chief Information Security Officer over at Epic. He talks a lot about how we're not in the business of security as security professionals. We're not in the business of security. Most of our organizations, unless you're, obviously at a security company, but most of our organizations, we are security employees at a business, and that business has needs, that business has responsibilities, and our job is to help move the business forward, but doing it in a secure manner. So being able to apply these security controls based off of environment is very critical because good security does require that context. It requires you to ensure that you're not just throwing security at the wall and hoping people follow it, but you're actually thinking about how does this help the business? A quick and easy example is when you think about dev or non-production environments and production environments. You probably want to have different security protections in your production environment than your dev or non-prod environment. You want the developers in that environment to be able to move really fast, to be able to go through and test things without having to jump through a bunch of hoops because you've locked that down. That's very difficult to do if your dev environment and your testing or staging environments are all co-located with your production environment in one account, because you would want to apply those highest protections where your customer data lives. And that brings me to the next point around constraining access to sensitive data. Access to sensitive data, it must be locked down, and you must ensure that only the right people and the right processes, which is really critical in the cloud, because it's not just people accessing your data, it's processes, it's resources, it's services. You want to make sure that the right people and process can access and manage your sensitive data stores. Another benefit of constraining access to sensitive data in this multiple account setup is because you can apply data protection guardrails at an account level. You can do this by using AWS Organizations, which we'll get into, but this helps prevent any detrimental mistakes from happening. I'm sure all of us, this is a cloud security conference. There's a lot of talk about AWS. So I'm sure a lot of you have heard of S3 bucket breaches, right? And you've heard of these buckets being public. If you haven't, do a quick Google search. Search S3 bucket breach, and you'll go down a long rabbit hole. If you're watching the recording, press pause, come back after a few hours of that S3 bucket breach rabbit hole, and you'll realize, wow, this is a really bad problem. Why are people exposing their S3 buckets? And just as a quick aside, S3 stands for Simple Storage Service. It's the original service on AWS. It's where a lot of organizations kick off their cloud journey by being able to store objects, and that can be anything from documents to videos to PDFs to images for your machines, whatever it may be, you can store in S3. And when an organization makes that bucket public, anyone on the internet with an AWS account can access that data. They can read it, they can write it, they can download it. So you think about people that have credit card data in those S3 buckets or PII in those S3 buckets. This could be public to where anybody can get. And that's what a lot of the breaches out there that have occurred have happened because of this. So instead of that being a potential risk or flaw that could be exploited, you can set these guardrails and say, hey, wherever I have my sensitive S3 buckets, I'm going to put this service control policy in place, which we'll talk about what that is and how that works. We're going to put this service control policy in place that says even if you want to deploy a public S3 bucket, you can't. We're going to stop that at its core, which is a great way and a really important way to implement some security best practices here in multiple accounts. I mentioned earlier around promoting innovation and agility. By using multiple accounts, you can promote a lot of innovation and agility because you're not restricting how fast people can move because you're applying security at a contextual level. So to do this, right, in order to succeed in an innovative manner, you have to encourage experimentation. You have to encourage development. You have to encourage early testing. It's very tough to promote when your development or your sandbox environments are clustered with your production environments. So by segmenting out those environments, you can enable teams to move faster by reducing dependencies on other teams and workloads, and also minimizing the impact of those changes. Now, the most important bullet point on this slide, in my opinion, is the one highlighted in red. We are at a cloud security conference after all. So this is really important. You are able to limit the scope of impact from adverse events, or another way to say it is you're limiting the blast radius of a bad event. One of the really cool things about an AWS account is that it does provide independence and isolation. So by design, all resources provisioned within an AWS account are logically isolated from resources provisioned in other accounts, even within your own AWS organization, right? So this isolation boundary provides you with a way to limit the risk of an application-related issue, misconfiguration, or malicious action. And if an issue occurs within one account, impact to workloads in other accounts are either reduced or effectively eliminated. Let me give you a quick example that we'll be able to show here in a little bit. One recommended way that you do this multiple account setup is you obviously have your production account where you have applications and things like that. One of the other accounts that you would set up would be what we would call let's call it a people account. This is where all of your users, all of your actual identity and access management users, IAM users, are housed. So if a user's account is breached in this scenario, say AJ's account, I don't have MFA enabled, and I wrote my password on a little sticky note and posted it on the company bathroom for some strange reason, and my account is breached. Now, when I'm a bad actor, I log into this account. I'm looking around, I'm trying to find out where are the sensitive resources, where are the things that I can do that are bad. And because I set this up in a multiple account setup, my people account, my user account, where this user's account was breached, doesn't have any resources in it. It doesn't have any of my application. My application's in a completely separate account, and I have to use an IAM role to access that. So now this bad actor is looking around and they don't see anything. Imagine they break into a house and they're like, oh man, it's a really big house, really nice. This is a large organization. I just cracked into AJ's house and I get in there and there's nothing in there. That's what this does. You have nothing but other people in there, and everybody's just sitting there, waving at them. And hey, we're other IAM users here as well. We're here. There's no resources here, and that's the whole benefit. One of the biggest benefits of multiple account strategies is that when bad things happen, we're all security professionals here, so it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. When bad things happen, the impact or the outcome of those bad events or adverse events is limited because you have segmented out everything and reduced that overall blast radius. Now, these other benefits are definitely important to go into, and I encourage you all. I'll share this AWS Organizations white paper at the end of this session for you to dive into this, but we're going to focus on the security side here and focus on how to limit the scope of impact from those adverse events. So let's talk about how you would set up AWS Organizations. AWS Organizations is the tool to use to organize resources across multiple accounts. You could use other services like an AWS Control Tower. I find that I like the control and flexibility I have with AWS Organizations, but if you're a really small organization and you don't really care about that flexibility, but you do want good security, Control Tower is another great option. AWS Organizations, what it does is it enables you to manage and maintain a multi-account setup. Within this setup, you will have a root account, and this is essentially your billing account. This is where your main management account, this is really where your finance team would live. There shouldn't be no resources, there shouldn't be any users, really anything in this account except for the AWS Organization setup in that billing console, so that your finance team can see all of the bills, all of the finances from these other accounts roll up into this one account. When we talk about reducing operational overhead of managing multiple accounts doesn't mean multiple bills. It still means one bill, and it's because of this AWS Organizations consolidated billing setup. The other accounts that you create would be nested under what AWS Organization calls organizational units, or OUs. Each organizational unit is a logical grouping of accounts in your AWS organization. They enable you to organize your accounts into a hierarchy and make it easier for you to apply management controls. When building this structure, though, it's very important to remember, I want to reduce the operational overhead of managing this. So what should you do there? First, you should consider what account groupings or OUs you should create. OUs allow you to organize accounts based on function, apply common policies, and organize your AWS accounts so that it's easier to share centrally managed resources across similar AWS accounts. Your OU should be based on function or common set of controls rather than just mirroring your company's reporting structure. Don't just throw in and have an HR OU, finance OU. Like, think about how they're going to be using these AWS accounts so that you can apply those protections, again, from a contextual perspective. The way that you apply policies and controls is using AWS organization policies, specifically a service control policy. A service control policy defines the AWS service actions, such as Amazon EC2 run instance, that accounts in your organization can perform. You would apply these SCPs at an OU level. If you think about role-based access control from an identity and access management perspective, you would apply permissions at a group level so that you're not managing it at an individual user level. Same thing here. You apply these permissions at an organizational unit level so that you can just add and remove accounts from organizational units. Going back to the acquisition example, your company buys a new organization, they have their application in one account, it's a prod account. You can throw their account directly under this prod organizational unit and apply the same protections that you have on your prod account to this new organization. So in this example setup, we have 5 accounts and 3 different OUs. You'll find the security industry is a little we're not necessarily all on the same page here. You'll see some people recommend 4 accounts, some people recommend 5 accounts, some people recommend 3 accounts. The biggest thing, and I'll explain to you why we have 5 here and what this looks at, but the biggest thing is limiting that blast radius. So first things first, we have this security account. And what is your security account? Your security account is where all your logs, security alerts, security services, everything is stored here. And access should be only limited to the security team. So only individuals that need access to security information, such as your logs or your alerts from Security Hub or config, will only be able to access that. You don't want anybody in dev or anybody else in the organization tampering or changing those things. So you put all of that over there and make sure that you have the right protections around that. We talked about the people account. This is an account where there should not be nothing but users, so that if there is a breach, then that account is compromised. There's no resources or sensitive customer data that a bad actor could manipulate or cause an incident. Your users should be required to use MFA here, and to access the other accounts, they'll use IAM roles and this cross-account access feature on AWS, which we won't dive too deep into today, but that's a very important concept to know about how users will access other accounts. Obviously, in your dev OU, you'll have some development, testing, staging, different things that are where you're doing non-production activities that may be a less stable environment, and you want that separated from your security environment and definitely from your production environment as well. And then lastly, you have your prod OU. This is where your application lives. This is where your sensitive data is stored. You should protect this at the highest levels and make sure a lot of these more stringent service control policies are applied here at that production, in that production account. Let's talk a little bit about SCPs. So SCPs, like I mentioned, are going to be applied at the organizational unit level. They're going to allow you to define what are the actions that the accounts in your organization can perform. But SCPs alone are not sufficient to grant permissions to the accounts in your organization, because no permissions are actually granted by an SCP. An SCP defines a guardrail or sets limits on the actions that your administrators can delegate to users and roles in those accounts. So that administrator still has to apply identity-based or resource-based policies to those users or to those roles or to the resources in your accounts. One of the core concepts about AWS, especially from an identity and access management perspective, is that anything that you do on AWS has to be explicitly granted via an IAM policy. So unless you were provided permissions to do X, you're not gonna be able to do it, even if there's a service control policy applied. So the way that this works is you have your service control policy, you have your IAM policy. What you can do in your AWS account sits right there in the middle. So say you're an administrative user, you have full access to the account, you can do anything, but the service control policy says you actually you can't do anything in S3. Even though you have this IAM policy that says that you can do anything, the service control policy is going to block you because of what's in place there that denies that action. So this is really important to know. A lot of times I'll run into folks and they're like, well, I set up my service control policy, but nothing's working. And it usually comes down to that user doesn't have any IAM permissions to actually do anything in that account, despite what the service control policy says. So we're going to hop into the console and do a quick demo. We'll also do a demo in the CLI, but we'll start in the console to give a quick overview of what we have set up. So let's pop over to this account here where I have the central AWS organization set up. And what I'm showing you here are the service control policies that we're going to demo today. Now, there's a few service control policies here that we won't look at, and I'll show you some resources at the end of the talk of where you can get some additional service control policies. But what we'll look at are a few examples of how you can say, I know that something bad will happen if this event happens, so I'm going to apply this SCP at the account to make sure that my users, even if they want to do something bad, they can. And this is what the service control policies will do. So let's take a look at a couple of these. This first one around deleting VPC flow logs is going to protect us where our VPC or virtual private cloud is where you can segment out your resources in AWS. It's your own little private network there on the cloud where you have your own IP address scheme, your own subnets, et cetera. And one thing that you can enable are flow logs, which can tell you about the traffic that's entering and exiting your VPC, where it's coming from, any of the additional data from it. Really good information from an incident response perspective if you're looking at some network traffic. So we in this AWS Organizations account, we don't want anybody deleting our flow logs. We want to make sure that our flow logs remain despite anybody's permissions, despite if we have super admin, we don't want anyone deleting flow logs, which is what this says. And your SCPs are going to be organized in a similar, they're going to look exactly like IAM policies, the same syntax. You're going to have an effect, which is going to be an allow or deny action or statement. You're going to have an action, which is going to describe what is the service that we're talking about here. So in this case, EC2 or logs. And then what is the action or API call that we're saying that this user cannot do. And then we're going to apply it, the last element here that you'll see both in IAM policies and service control policies are resources. So what resources does apply? This applies everywhere. So that's one policy that we'll demo here in a second. The other that's really common is a region enforcement policy. So say you're an organization, you know you're only going to remain in US East 1, you're not doing anything in any other region, and you want to prevent from a common attack, which is where someone breaches your account and they start to spin up resources in a region you're not using, maybe doing some Bitcoin mining or something else out there that you don't want happening. And you don't know anything about it because it's in a different region that you're not operating. So you can limit this and say, unless you're in US East 1, you can't do anything. You can't even look at EC2. You can't even describe users. You can't spin up anything. And that lets you know that all of my users are going to be operating in one region and not be able to go outside that region. And you can definitely add more regions or take away regions as you look at that. We also don't want people leaving our organization. We don't want people to say, hey, I don't like these permissions associated with AWS org, so I'm going to leave the organization. So we can apply that policy as well to this account. I'm showing this EC2 one now, but we're not going to demo it just because it gets a little complex with the commands. But you can also specify when we're thinking about configuration management. Maybe you only want a certain type of an EC2 instance, or you only want a certain AMI. You can specify that information directly here in a service control policy. So now I know if someone spins up a new server, it's going to meet the security protections and configurations that I had set forth in my organization. So those are a couple of the service control policies that that are common that we'll take a look at here in a shortly. That you'll be able to see how they work. But the important thing there is, they are JSON. Very easy to read, very human readable. And we'll take a look at how does this work. So over here in this other account that we have set up, you can see that I'm looking in the VPC console. We have the VPC flow logs displayed here. You can have this sans demo VPC flow log. And I'm going to grab this, this flow log ID because I'll need it in a little bit. But one thing to point out, you see here, I'm in North Virginia, which North Virginia is the US East 1 region. So I'm able to see everything. And you remember, we have that region enforcement policy. So let's see what happens when I pop over to US East 2. Can I still see some of the same information associated with VPCs? I can't. I'm not authorized to perform this function. I'm not even authorized to look at this page or to see any data on this page because of that SCP, because of that service control policy. Let's take a look over at EC2 as well in this same region. I don't even know how many instances there are. I don't know how many security groups there are. I don't know any information because I'm in the wrong region. So when you're looking at this and service control policies, you can really establish this guardrail, this kind of castle around your environment and limit what people can and can't do. Now we're over here in US East 1, and you can see that I can now see instances. I can see all of the data where the only difference between these two windows are that I'm in a different region and that service control policy is preventing me from being able to see anything. Now, I always like to do things in the CLI when I'm doing any demos just to make things a little bit easier and clear. And I think the AWS CLI is a great tool for you to learn, especially from a troubleshooting perspective. It's really hard to figure out why are things not working in the console, but in the CLI you can. So if you're getting started on AWS, highly recommend to get your hands dirty with the CLI. So let's do some similar functions that I just was showing just to show, how does this work both from a CLI perspective and in the console. So really quick, we'll just describe some instances here. We'll try to list out the instances, and you don't normally have to append a region to this command, but I'm going to do it just to show you that we're looking in region in US East 1. So I was able quickly to get a bunch of data about these instances, right? We're not going to go through all of that information. But now let's go ahead and do the same exact command, but let's do it in US East 2. I want to see what are the instances in US East 2. And what we should see, and what we did see is, we're getting this unauthorized operation. I'm in Cloud 9, which is AWS's web-based IDE that you can use the AWS CLI in. It's really simple to do demos in this because it doesn't require you to go into terminal or configure anything too crazy. So as you can see there, when I ran the describe instances command in US East 1, it populates, but when I ran it in US East 2, I'm getting the unauthorized operation. Let's clear that off and let's do another command here. Let's try to leave this organization. I'm really tired of all these. I don't know, I can't remember if it's an S or not, and we're gonna find out here shortly. But I'm really tired of this organization. I wanna get out of here. So it's actually organizations. Let's clear that real quick so it's easier to see. But if I wanted to leave this organizations, I'm going to get an access denied exception. Again, not allowed to do it because of that SCP that we applied. And then lastly, let's go ahead and try to delete these flow logs, right? So when you run an AWS command, you're going to say the service, you're going to say the command, and then oftentimes you'll have to apply some additional context here around what you're trying to do. So I'm able to say, I want to delete this flow log. I don't want anyone to see some of the traffic that's going to and from my VPCs. Let me go ahead and get rid of that. And I'm getting the unauthorized operation. I can't do it. I'm not authorized to perform this function. Really great way to establish these guardrails, both for users that are using the CLI, people that are even services that are doing things programmatically. The service control policies, hopefully this demo shows you that you can establish security protections that prevent bad things from happening, which is really the whole goal of security. Is we should be proactively stopping things and not always reacting to things. So I'll finish up just showing a few resources. I think initially, if you are looking at this and you're like, wow, I really liked what AJ said, and if you didn't like what I said, hold that to yourself. And I don't need to know. No, I'm just playing. Definitely give feedback in the survey and provide that information there if this didn't go as well as you thought it would. But go out and implement AWS Organizations in your account. Go ahead and get this set up. Start to configure some SCPs, and then review and refine those as you understand the usage in that account. A couple of these resources that you'll be able to find, you don't have to come up with these service control policies yourself. You have all of these resources that I'm sharing here that give you great examples of service control policies to implement in your environment that you can go out directly copy these from these sites and download. So appreciate the people out here that have created this. Really great resources to go out and take and immediately implement in your environment pretty quickly. Thanks again for the opportunity, Sands. Thanks, Frank. I know I'm up here on the last minute. But I'll be in Slack. I have a call right after this, but I'll be in Slack shortly thereafter and answer any questions and collaborate with people in chat over the next few days. So really enjoyed this. I hope people got something out of it and enjoyed the conversation.